Okay, so let's see if we can hear all of that. I think this is recording here. We're gonna find out in a little bit, but what I've got here is the uh, tone template that we put together in class a little while ago. Uh, what I'm gonna do is just duplicate it. I'm gonna rename this. Let's go with something easy like sampler demo video. All right. So I have this going, and just as a refresher, what this template has, it already has preload, mouse pressed, and key pressed already called up, although there's nothing in them. Everything else is the default. And then if you go over here, oh, I already have that loaded in. There is the tone.js library already linked right here on line 6 of the index file. Uh, so we've got that there. We won't need to do anything with the style.css file, and then we'll just work normally in the sketch file. So you'll notice that I also have added in the sound files folder. Again, just as a refresher of a way to do that, you just click right on this arrow. You would hit add folder, give it a name, and there you go. And I've already added in one sound file here, but again, just as a refresher to do that, you go to wherever you want it, either right up at the top if you want it in the main navigation, or if you want it in sound files, you go right down to sound files, click this down arrow, uh, and hit add file. It will pull up in this little document browser right here. You can either just click and drag, or if you click on this window, it pulls open a way to interact with everything. And then I just loaded in spade hit.mp3. I'm not going to add in a second one. Um, and that just loaded it right there. All right, so I'm going to show you just real quick, just the basics of uh, the sampler assignment. So what we're going to do is create a multiplayer, um, and just like normally in class, I cannot type very well. So we're going to fix typos as we go along. All right, so I'm going to use this multiplayer as an object to store and play back all of our sounds. Um, so now that we've made this globally, we can just say multiplayer gets assigned, and it's going to become a new tone dot players. There we go. Um, Now the difference between tone dot player and tone dot players with an S is that tone dot players um, can load in multiple sound files. So that's why we're going to want to use this for this assignment. And what you do is just inside of the parentheses is just shift. Got a new keyboard. Some of the keys are a little sticky. Doesn't want to work for the shift all the time. Is put in some brackets inside of the parentheses there, and then you can just enter down just a little bit. And we're going to input our sound files that we want to use. We're going to use what's called JSON format or JavaScript object notation. You'll notice some of this is present in the tone reference material when you look at it. And essentially what that's saying is just inside of these braces right here, you just give it a label. So for this one, I'm going to call it spade colon and then what it is. So inside of these um, quotation marks, so as a string, we'll do sound underscore files, which is the name of that folder. Got right there. Um, slash spade plus plus sticky shift key plus hit dot mp3. So this is telling our computer, a P5, where to find this file. We're going to label it as spade. So whenever we want to talk to this specific file, you just tell it spade, uh, or whatever you would want to name it. Now, if you wanted to add in multiple files, you would just say, and actually I'll do that just to show off a brief example. So we could say comma, and then enter in another one. And if you had multiples here, you would just say, I'm just going to make one up, but I'll delete it so that this code still works. But water, comma, and sound file sound underscore sound underscore files slash water dot mp3 and so on and so on. So you have multiple files. Now for this example, I'm only going to use one file, but this way, whenever you wanted to specify a specific sound file within the multiplayer, you would just have to give it that label. You just got to separate all of them by a comma. If you don't have the right commas after each of these, you'll get some kind of error like unexpected identifier. Um, so basically, it's saying what that means is that P5 was looking for this comma to separate it, but it got some other things. It just reads this from top to bottom. So it would say, hey, there was no comma to separate this from water, the word water. Don't know what to do with that. Get that. As I delete the comma, we'll get some of this will highlight into red um, there. So I'm just going to delete this right there. And there we are. All right, so I've got that there. Another thing I want to point out is that if you don't have your file spelled exactly how it's named over here on the left, then you will have problems. You'll get an error called buffer is not defined or loaded. What a buffer is just how a computer loads files in order to play back. So you've probably seen this occasionally if you're trying to watch a YouTube video or something on Netflix. It was with not a great connection. So you'll see something that's buffering. It's trying to load things into the buffer. So if you don't have your folder name slash spade hit or whatever you name your file exactly the same as here, whenever we run this, we'll get an error saying that. So basically just saying it can't find the file to play it back. So one thing you can do is just click this little arrow right next to your sound file and just rename it something to make sure everything matches up. That's kind of my default to do right there. I'm just gonna scoot that over a bit. All right, so now we've loaded in a file. The next thing we have to do is, for this assignment, is to create something to play it back. So I'm going to go down into setup, is where we're gonna do most of this, and we're going to make a button. But before we actually go to make a button, we just need to add in a variable. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say play, actually no, play spade. Yeah, I'll go with that. Play spade. Yeah, sure, why not? So we go into setup and say play spade gets assigned. It's going to be the result of the create button function. So there's a library built into P5 called DOM, D-O-M, and that does a lot of things with making buttons, making sliders, some graphics, some logic, things like that. You can check that out in the reference page for P5 if you have more questions about any of these. But basically, we need to say that our variable gets assigned the value of the result of create button, and what you type in the parentheses is just the label that you want for the button. That goes as a string. So this is called spade hit. So I'll just call it spade. And that's the text that will physically appear on the button. So now we need two other things. If I were to run the code right now, and I'll run it, you'll notice that in the preview, this button is here. It's just not on the canvas. So if you were to display the canvas in any context, you would not actually see or be able to interact with this button. So now that we've made our button, you can go right underneath that line and say play spade dot position. And that gets just an X and Y position for the play spade button in pixels, just like whenever we make our shape. So I'm just going to pick some easy ones, say 100, comma 100. So again, that's X and Y, 100, 100. It'll be right about there where my mouse is. So we've got that. So now we've got our button. If I were to run that, there's the button. We just need one more thing, and that's what you actually want to have happen when you click on the button. So if I go play spade dot mouse pressed, what we can do is specify a specific function that we want to occur when this button is clicked on. So we can say, I'm going to call this play back. I'll call it spade playback just so we know what it is. There we go. Spade playback. There we go. So now we have this, but it still won't quite work because we need to actually define what this function spade playback does. So if I'm just going to scroll down just a little bit to the very bottom of my code, making sure I'm not inside of any of these other functions, and I'm going to say function spade playback. Like it's parentheses. Open and close braces, just like that. And we're going to just make a custom function, and this is going to be just a real simple function. It's only going to have one line in it. So we're going to say multiplayer.get. So this is saying we're going to talk to our multiplayer object that we made back up in function preload. But we're going to get a specific value from there. And so inside these parentheses, you type as a string the label that you gave the sound. So spade. All right. So we have that, and then we just say dot start. Shift key. There we go. Dot start. So what this will do is it will get this value, and it will play this sound file from start to finish. That's what it does. If I refresh the code and click it, we should see. Should was the keyword. Let's check the settings real fast. Output device. Oop, not that one. Do that one. All right, let's try this one more time. Why are we not hearing that? Is this on? That's what I thought. It should just be mouse pressed. Why don't I hear my things? Try this one more time. Huh. Let's do a little bit of troubleshooting and come back. All right, so it just turns out I'm just a little bit of an idiot. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing this. So you should be able to see this now. So everything's working, but we just need one more thing here. So as I go back up to our multiplayer, we just need to say dot to master, give that its parentheses. Because the way that this is going to work, we're going to be connecting all of our sound sources from A to B to C to D all the way out into the speakers. And the dot to master is what connects all your sound output, your sound to the output of your device. So if I refresh this and click the button, you should now be hearing it. So now we have our dot to master. So for the sampler project using multiplayer, the goal is to load a total of 12 different sounds into here. So you can essentially just repeat the process I just showed you. You just load in 12 sounds into players, create 12 buttons, create 12 real simple playback functions, call them back. It's a whole lot of copy paste should go just like that. That's the first part of the assignment. All right. So we'll go from there. The second part is to load in an effect from the tone library. So I'm going to do one just real quick here to show you. It'll be pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to go in and add in a variable right here. We'll say reverb. I'm just going to load this up. So what we're going to do is still in preload. We're going to go in, and this will have to happen right before we load in the multiplayer. So I'm going to say reverb gets assigned. There's a new value. It's going to be new tone dot, and I'm going to use free verb. There's a few reverbs inside of the tone library. I personally think this one, or the JC reverb, works the best. You can play around, but just the normal one, I seem to have issues with. So I'll have that there. Actually, I'm going to do this slightly differently. Instead of .toMaster, I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to change this to .chain. So I'll say all right. So what the .chain does is you can specify a specific chain. As I mentioned before, we're going A to B to C and so on, all the way out to the speakers. So the .chain, instead of saying, oh, okay, we're sending this to, sending the sound file to the delay to the this and that, you have to go find each one to figure out where you might have an issue in your pathway. You can just define that whole chain of events right here. The only thing is at the very end, you need to include the tone.master, which is just the same as toMaster. You're just saying, hey, you need to send it out to the master speakers. So I'll be utilizing that. You don't have to utilize this because your effect chain for this is only 4 things in the speakers. But if you want to, you're more than welcome to. So I'm going to have that right there. So now there's an effect. If we load it, we should be able to hear it. You can hear it. It's a little bit subtle right now just because of the default values. So I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to go back into our setup function and do one thing. I'm going to say, I forgot. I always forget. I'm going to add a variable at the top. This is going to be our slider. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to say our slider equals the value of create slider. Just like our create button function, this does the same thing. It just makes a slider. So see, what you need is 4 specific values when you start this. You need the lowest number on the slider. So I'm going to say 0.1. The highest value for this one, I'm going to say 0.9. Where you want it to start on there, so I'll say 0.4. And then how far you want to each little increment of the slider to adjust the value. So I'm going to say, how about 0.05, like so on. So now these numbers will be different for every slider that you make, depending on the effect that you want to use. So what you can do is open up the Tone.js reference page. I've posted links to that in the Google Classroom for the effect that you're wanting to use and the specific parameter that you want to control. I recommend some of the ones that that you look up. They say there's either a default value or they give a little definition for it at the very top, and then build this kind of around there. Find what that default value is and set that to your third number, just so it starts there automatically. If you see it says something like a normal range, that means it's between 0 and 1. So you don't want to go past 0 and 1 on your first 2 numbers. Could be something different. I know a few of them go between -12 and 12. Some of them are just a number of some sort. So just kind of base it off of what that range is, or if you have a default value of 0.2, you don't want to have any of these numbers being super large, because then either your function won't work, you'll be able to you'll be adjusting this slider and you won't be able to tell a difference because it can't take the numbers, or it'll just crash and not do anything. So kind of base this around those default values in the reference page. So I've made this slider, I've given it there. So I'm just going to say slider dot position, and give it a position just like our buttons. So I'm going to say 100 comma, I'll say 110. All right. So it should be just below our button. And in fact, if I run this, you can see that. I'm actually going to make that a little farther below the button. There we go. 120. Now the last thing we need to do, that's the default length of that. You can adjust the slider length by just saying our slider name dot style. And for this, stick and shift key. All right. For this, we need two specific things. All of our sliders are by default going to be width, and that's just the way that DOM makes the sliders. So you just say width, and then you say how wide. So I'm going to say 100 pixels. So by adjusting that number, if you run this, we notice our slider is a little smaller now. That's just to help you save space. You could leave it as the default, so you don't absolutely need this slider.style line. It just helps you save a little space. So I'm going to set it for that. Now what we need to do is, now we've made our slider and given it the ranges we need to map it to our effect that we want to control. So I'm going to go into the draw function, and I'm going to say reverb dot room size, which is a parameter of the effect. And in fact, if I go tone.js, this is the reference page. If I click on the API, that's the all the reference stuff. If I scroll down to find Freeverb, which is the one I'm using, I'll go here and say room size. And that's just essentially just how the bigger the number, the longer the delay, so the more thing we hear. What I want to point out is when you scroll down to members, this is essentially any of the parameters you can check or adjust, or this little symbol right here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what this is in a later video, but what this little symbol means is that this value is constantly being checked or adjusted at what's called signal rate. So 44,100 times per second. This is continually being checked. What that means in terms of coding is you have to add in one more line. You can't just say talk to the room size of reverb. You have to see what is the current value of the room size of the reverb. So that, I have to add that there. And I'm going to say that's going to equal slider.value. I want to point out that this is a function, whereas this is a value. So you have the parentheses on this side versus no parentheses here, because we're applying it to the value of the slider, whereas we're just checking a number right here. So if I rerun this and click it, you hear that. And if I increase, my trackpad works, increase this and click it again, it sounds much louder, much more in an open, bouncy space. Like it's in a much bigger space. You kind of hear that delay versus if I move this all the way down, it sounds pretty boring. So I've got that kind of in the middle. I like things with just a little bit of reverb on them. So we have that. So for the, well, I should say there's one more thing, and that is just to add in some text. A few things. So if I'm just going to say amount of reverb, and that was on the wrong side of the apostrophe. So you want to say what the text is and where I want to put it. So 100, 140. I'll say that there. And actually, that's a little overlapping. 150. All right. Refresh that. There we go. Because you'll notice the buttons default to having some kind of text. You need text on your button. The sliders, not so much. So for this assignment, you want to include the text on your sliders. So we have that there. So now I've shown you how to load in a sound, make a button, make the button play back the sound, add in a slider, um, how to find the things you need on the reference page for the effects that you then link up your slider to control the effect with, um, and have that all on the screen. So what you're going to do is, as I mentioned before, have 12 sounds, 12 buttons, pick 4 effects um, from this library here, and load them in. Have them be in the chain so that you can hear all of them and control them with a slider. So again, you'll need a total of 12 buttons, 4 sliders for that. Okay, so that's essentially what that's going to go for there. What I'm going to show you now is just a little thing so that you can control this with something on your keyboard as opposed to the buttons. So this will be kind of the assignment for everyone, just getting used to doing some of these videos. I'm going to delete function mouse press just because we don't need it in this example. So we have that there. Again, make sure that all of your sliders have a label so that way we know what they are. So we've got that there. Again, showing you have to make a variable for all of your effects, all of your sliders, all of your buttons, things like that. So I'm going to go into function key pressed, and I'm going to add a conditional statement. Again, this is just so we can interact with our code either by clicking the buttons on the screen or by hitting the keys on the keyboard. So I'm going to say if, there we are. Essentially what we want to check is if the key, can't type today, key code is equal to, and then we can pick what key we want to do. So what I recommend, unless you just have a chart pulled up to check your keys, is actually going to comment this out and add into the draw function console.log. I'm going to say key, comma, key code. So what this is going to do is give us the continually in the draw function. It's going to tell us in our console what key is being pressed and what that key code number is with it. So if I run this, we're getting nothing at the moment. So I can go and I can I have to click in the canvas first, but then I can hit a key on my keyboard. So now I'm saying I hit the T key, it's number 84. So you can use this method to map all of your buttons out. So I'm going to, I'm just going to work my way over. So I'm going to say Q, that's 81. So if I go in here, if key code is equal to 81, I'm going to, in the braces, I'm going to run spade playback, just like that. And then I can say else if key code is equal to, and now I'm gonna click over here and hit W. W, as we can see in the console, is 87. So if key code is equal to 87, and then I could brace, there we are, and close parenthesis, open brace, there we go. Then I can say function, we don't need a function, we're going to call a function, and I'll call this water playback, just like so. I'm just going to uncomment these so we get rid of the errors. All right. So now we have this going. I've got a hypothetical other sound that's not currently loaded, but now if I rerun the code, well, it should be able to just trigger this playback because key pressed, whenever you press any key, it runs whatever code you type in its brackets one time. So you can just build this if, else if, else if, else if for all 12 of your sounds, giving it a specific number value, and it'll run through, it'll check, and if the key being pressed happens to match up with a key code, it will play that specific sound. So if I rerun this and I hit Q on my keyboard, we now hear that I am playing the sound, which I can also do just by clicking. So that'll be the assignment for this, as we're just kind of getting used to things, is going in and adding inside a function key pressed, kind of how I have here, a series of if, else if, and so on, to your sampler project so that you can trigger all 12 sounds with your keyboard as well as clicking them on the screen. All right, so that shouldn't be too much. I've just kind of built on the previous assignment. Everyone should have their sampler more or less going by this point. So again, the beginning of that video is just kind of a overview. So we've got that. Again, you need to kind of organize your buttons on the screen. So what I'm asking for in the assignment details is just 4 buttons by 3 buttons. And you can make this canvas as big as you need to by adjusting these numbers and create canvas right here. You can just make it as big as you need to. We give them some space, put the sliders somewhere so they aren't overlapping with the buttons, give everything the labels. Only now we can control it with the buttons and the keyboard. So if you have any questions, let me know, and we will start loading things in, go from there, and I'll have another video shortly just about the basics of sound synthesis, and we'll start getting into creating our own sounds shortly. So thank you. Feel free to message me with any questions you might have or errors that don't seem to make sense.